Welcome back. In this, the last video in this series, we're going to finish up this garden bench. And the first step to finishing up is to build the bottom shelf assembly. Now obviously the bottom shelf is going to be very useful for holding things like watering cans and gardening tools, etc. But it also is important because it's going to add a great deal of strength and rigidity to the bench. So let me first give you a little overview on this garden bench of how this goes together, and then we'll jump right into the steps of building this on the other garden bench. When I originally envisioned this shelf, I envisioned shelf boards that would be flush with the top of this rail around the bottom. And that's what I wanted to achieve in building this. Now, you could just put cleats on either side, 3/4 of an inch down, since our shelf boards are 3/4 of an inch thick. But to add some rigidity to the structure, what I decided to do was actually build a complete frame. And the frame is sized perfectly to fit within the existing frame and attach, and that really firmed up the entire structure. I'm going to show you all that in just a minute. Now, I've been very lucky and getting consistent results by jointing one edge of our 1x6 board, which is 5.5 inches wide, then cutting the other edge with the table saw and getting 5 3/8 inches as a finished width. So it turns out that 7 of these boards gives me 37 5/8 inches down to where our potting soil container is located. But we had to do something a little bit different there, so let me show you that. As it turns out, kind of finding the perfect trash can to be our potting soil container wasn't the easiest thing in the world to do. I went to 4 different stores before I found something I thought would work. I wanted it to be plenty big to hold a full bag of potting soil, but when I got it home and started measuring it, I realized that the height of it was going to be just a smidge too tall to fit on top of this shelf. Now, we are supported by our sub top and the rim of the trash can sitting on that, but I wanted the additional support. So what I did here was I built a different frame and attached the shelving from underneath, and it worked out just perfect. Now the weight of this container is equally divided between this shelf and our sub top, and I think it's going to work out great. So let's go take a look at how all these pieces come together. All right, now we've already established that to make an even number of boards, we want our frame for the shelf to be 37 5/8 inch long. That'll come to about right there. And what we need to do now is to build this frame, and the most critical dimension is the front to back dimension here in the corner. And you want to get this right. If this is off a little bit, it simply means that one or both of these boards might be a little out of whack. But we know that this is square because we were really careful in putting this together before. So we'll work off this dimension. In my case, it is 21 9/16. So 21 9/16 by 37 5/8. And this is the structure of the frame, and it's going to go inside this frame just like this. And the advantage of building a rigid frame like this, in addition to adding additional support to our garden bench, is that we get this piece across the middle that's going to keep the shelves from sagging when there's weight put on there. And we want a nice tight fit This will be a test as to how square you put everything together. And the way to position this is to simply use a scrap of the wood that you're using for your shelf stock. And all you've got to do is position this flush with the top of this rail and then butt this up to the bottom of it and clamp it in place. Once it's clamped in place, you can screw it in and ready to put those shelves into place. Now, in my case, I didn't attach those bottom shelves because I want to be able to take them out and move them, remove them if I ever need to make it a little easier to move the bench around. Now this, if I built it right, it's going to fit right in here, just like this. It should be tight, but not so tight that it changes anything. And it should just slide right in, just like that. And then the easiest way to do this is probably just eyeball one dimension and get a spring clamp on it. And then use your little cheater board here, get this flush, and put an actual real clamp on it. Need that down a little bit. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Might have to do a little readjustment here and there, but we'll get these clamps on here. Just like that. And then I'm going to try to get one down here. That up a little bit. And we'll put another clamp right there. Okay, at least we know it's not going to fall out now. Now, I can get this one in. Just a little bit. All right, now we can fine tune the height adjustment here. Whoa, I don't hit my head. That one's in nice and solid. That one's pretty good, but I'm going to move down here. It's a little easier for me to reach it. Yeah, I thought this one was a little bit low. Bring that up flush. Tighten that up. That certainly looks better. Now I'll get around behind here. This one needs to come up. That looks pretty good. Okay, so we've got our frame situated here and clamped in place so that our shelf boards are flush all the way around. The next step is to simply screw this frame into place. We're going to use our same 1.25" wood screws. We want to put them in the front rail, the end rail, and the back rail. We want to get 4 close to the corners and 2 or 3 in the field, front and back, and a couple in the end here so we're fully supported. And then we're ready to just cut our shelf boards and lay them into place. Now, as a frame of reference here, you'll recall that our rail width here was 2.5 inches. Our boards are 3/4 of an inch thick, so essentially you'll need to build this frame in here out of 1.75" wide stock, and then simply position it so that you're flush all the way around. So I'm going to get that done. I'm going to get those screws in, and then we're ready to build the section that goes under our potting soil container. All right, with this other frame attached, now we need to kind of get up close and personal here with this container for our topsoil. And the thing to do is get a nice straight stick, just a little shorter than the distance from front to back. And if you just lightly hold that stick up to the bottom of the trash can and then push it up flush to the rail and make a mark. And then do exactly the same thing on the back side. Now theoretically these are going to be the same, but you want to check. After you get your marks there, then use your small combination square and set the end of that to where it's right on that mark. And check the one in the back to make sure it's exactly the same. And then that is the width that you want to make our cleats to go in here. And in my case, that is 1 5/16 of an inch. Now I'm going to cut a test piece just to make sure. After I'm sure that it's the right width, then what we want to do is we want to cut that to the exact length to go from this end rail to this interim frame. And that length is 14 3/4. We'll check it front and back. It better be the same. And it is 14 3/4. So we're going to cut two pieces, 14 3/4, to the right thickness, and that's going to be the cleats. And what we're going to do is we're going to attach them where the edge is flush, exactly flush with this rail. Then we'll mount our shelves to the bottom of that, and they should ride right on the bottom of this trash can. So let's take a look at that. All right, now I've got the cleats cut to width and I've cut them to length, and they run from the end rail down to this mid frame, and they are exactly flush with the tops of the rails. I've got them clamped in place, and now I'm just screwing them in. When that's done, then what we're going to do is we're going to take our shelf boards and we're going to screw them in from the bottom up into this cleat. And I'll show you a little trick to help you out on that in just a second when I finish screwing these in. Okay, now I've got the shelves laid in over here on this section. On this section, we want to screw the shelves in from the bottom. And the act of screwing those screws in and those shelves across this is going to give a great deal of additional rigidity at this end. Don't forget, at that end, we've got that subframe that's offering rigidity down there. Now, if you have a lot of room in your shop, I would just lay this table over on its back to install this. I don't have enough room to do that, but what I did do was I put the legs up on top of 2x4s, all four corners, just to raise the table up a little bit so that I'd have some room to get in there. And just like with all the other screws, I'm drilling pilot holes and countersinking those holes so that the screws are nice and flush. Not that anybody may get under this and look at it, but if they do, they'll see nicely countersunk holes. And I'm putting the screws in, instead of using a power driver, I'm putting these in with a screwdriver. The reason being is that these holes, the pilot holes on these shelves, are really close to the end, and I want to make sure that I don't split these. So I'm going to use a soft touch. I want to get them in tight, but if I start to feel any resistance or any cracking, I can quickly stop and enlarge the pilot hole if necessary. And there we go. Well, I got a whole bunch more of these to do. It's going to take a little bit of time, and there may be some colorful language involved, since I don't like laying on my back and doing this. So let me finish this up, and we'll get to doing some of the work that's going to really dress this thing up and make it look fantastic. We're almost finished. All right, now there's one last rather important step in the assembly of these garden benches, and that's actually to attach the subtops on a permanent basis. Up till this point, we've had them just laid into place so we could get everything fit perfectly. Now what I'm going to do is put a light bead of glue in here and just lay these subtops back in place. Now, if I recall, this one was a really tight fit, and it looks like I recalled correctly. Let's do it this way. There we go. And get this one in. And while those are setting up, I can do a little bit of light sanding on this unit. So the first thing that I decided to do to dress up our garden potting bench was to make this sort of scroll work top board to fit right up here. I think this adds a lot of visual interest to the top, and I think it evens out the flow of your eye from here up, because this adds a little bit of weight to the top of the bench. So let me show you how I went about making this. To make this sort of scrolled back for the garden bench, I first sketched it out on a piece of drawing paper. And I just sort of sketched out a design that I liked the looks of, and then I used this French curve to sort of smooth my curves. And then I cut that piece out, and this is half, and I taped it down just on the ends and traced that pattern onto the wood. And where I had the tape here in the middle, I simply flipped it over and lined up the other half and drew the same design there. Now, obviously for this second one, I just used the first one to sketch in the drawing. So the next thing that I did after I had this drawn in was I set this up to cut it out with a jigsaw. And I could have gone to the bandsaw and did this, but I just decided to do it with the jigsaw, quick and simple, and do it right here to make it a little bit easier. So the only thing that you want to kind of do here is make sure that you put your clamps on the side that's the cutaway side, because the clamps can leave, particularly if you're clamping them down tight, can leave a little bruise mark on the cedar, and you don't really want to do that. So I'm clamping this in the waist area, and I'm going to cut half of this with the jigsaw, and then I'm going to turn it around, cut the other half, and I'm going to cut outside the line. Now just cut the other side out exactly the same. I've turned it around, and I've used a couple of blocks here because now I am having to clamp it in the good part, and I don't want to leave any clamp marks. So just again, cut outside the lines. And there we go. All right, to finish this up now, all I'm doing is using my oscillating spindle sander to get this down right to the line and smooth everything out. After cutting out and shaping this top piece, I did a little wood burning decoration here. This is the name of the person I'm going to be giving this potting bench to. I put a couple little vine patterns on here. Now, I'm a real novice at wood burning and self-taught on top of that, which I could use some help. So don't look too close. Hey, stop that. Anyway, after I got that done, I attached this using some Festool dominoes. Now, that's not so much for structural integrity, but more to keep these two edges, these two boards perfectly aligned when I glued it on. Once I got that on, then I did some hand sanding lightly on this. And I also slightly rounded the edges that are what I call touch or contact edges. So I'm getting pretty close to being finished with this. I've got one more decorative piece that I'm going to do, and that's to put a couple of finials on top of these two posts. And I'm going to actually cover how I made those in a separate sort of bonus video. I'll get that posted and up on my YouTube site in the next week or so, and you can take a look at that if you want to. Well, here we are, wrapping up another project in the down-to-earth woodworking shop. I think the Cedar garden potting bench turned out pretty good. It looks nice and it's extremely functional. There's a ton of storage down on the shelf on the bottom and a very large work surface on the top. And I think this grate surface here in the middle is nice for when you're potting a plant so that any excess dirt or soil can fall through and be caught by the pan underneath. There's also a large storage container here for your potting soil, accessible by removing this top section. The finish on this is going to be a penetrating oil finish, which I've used recently on 2 different projects outside, and I'm very pleased with the way it has been shedding water. When the rain hits it, it beads up like water on a freshly waxed car. Now, as I do these projects in the shop, I'm always hoping that you can pick up some tips or tricks that will help you in your woodworking. But in this particular project, I hope you picked up a couple of overarching themes. The first being that you don't really need sophisticated drawings or plans to build a project like this. If you'll recall, I started with a simple sketch on a Marks-a-Lot board and never drew anything else but that. The other overarching thing that I hope you got out of this video series is that there are certain projects in the shop that lend themselves to building multiples. I built 2 of these, and if I had gone straight through without doing any video, I suspect that 2 took me about an hour more than building 1. So when you're building things like this in your shop, think about your friends and neighbors and how much they might appreciate receiving one of your projects as a gift. Well, your gift to me is watching these videos, and I really do appreciate that. I look forward to seeing you in the next series. Thank you so much.